Hello, good people. Welcome to Hell in a Handbasket open mic number 6. I just dropped the link to join if you like in the comment section there. Well, what a week. As people choose to join or not, I guess I'll start rambling on about my week. I guess one thing, check out the review I did of the Odyssey. I watched the Odyssey Friday afternoon. And yeah, I posted my review on the channel. Check it out. It was good. I will say it was good. Was it great? No, I didn't think it was great, but very, very good movie. Check it out if you like big epics. It's certainly something that deserves the big screen. I can't imagine watching a movie like that on, a flat screen TV. But I don't think I'd watch it again. Let's just put it that way. My anytime I watch a movie, either consciously or subconsciously, I say to myself, once I've done, am I ever going to watch that movie again? And if the answer is yes, then it was probably a really excellent movie. I didn't get that vibe from this one. But anyway, check out my review of the movie, and I guess we'll go on from here. What do we want to talk about this week? Well, I guess, as always, we'll talk about the conflict in Iran. Um, oh, where do you start with this nightmare of a conflict? It was a lot of more of the same between the U.S. and Iran as there was last week. If you recall, last week they were trading shots. That went out throughout the week up until yesterday when the U.S. Stopped bombing Iran. I think it was the first time in 2 weeks that it hadn't done a bombing campaign that day. And reportedly, according to the New York Times, was the reason why Trump decided not to go ahead with a bombing campaign yesterday was there's a real concern within the Pentagon. The the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Kane, and J.D. Vance both apparently talked to Trump about the situation. And Kane let Trump know that their weaponry is at critically low levels, particularly the Patriot interceptors. So they don't have a whole lot of interceptors left. So yeah, I guess we're at the stage of another ceasefire until the U.S. decides that there's not a ceasefire. There were reports this morning that Iran has basically also said, okay, if we're not being bombed, we're not going to bomb you. I've read that in the media and on social media and things like that. I haven't actually seen a source from the Iranians saying that, though. So until I get some sort of confirmation from the Iranians that that's the case, I'd probably be cautious to see if it was actually true. So, with respect to the conflict last week itself, as I said, there was a lot more bombing going on. The U.S. hit stuff, though I didn't get the impression that any of it was really critical. um, if it was going to be critical, they'd have reported about it and said, hey, look at the big, great things we did. I didn't read any of that. Ice cold Coke. Diet Coke, actually. So I didn't get any of that from it. What I did get, though, is the Iranians in turn continued to hit the bases in Bahrain and Kuwait, as well as Jordan. And they also hit a U.S. base in Iraq. And from what I gather and everything I've read, effectively the U.S. has been pushed out of a lot of the bases in the Gulf region because they've just been completely destroyed. They're not habitable anymore. So What does that mean? Well, basically, they keep getting pushed out into places like Jordan. So as of last week, the forces that were in Bahrain were pushed out of Bahrain, and I think they were relocated to Jordan. Same with the forces in Kuwait. I think there are still some forces in Kuwait, but not a whole lot. I think they've also been pushed to Jordan. So logically, what then happened? The Iranians started hitting Jordan. And there was a big attack on the base in Jordan. There was a lot of footage going around on social media talking about how the base got hit, and you could see some of those videos where the soldiers are running around and stuff like that. I think it's legit. So that's where we're at with the hit in Iran, or the Iranian hit on the U.S. bases. I think basically what Iran is doing is effectively just destroying all the assets that the U.S. has in the Gulf region to the point where they're going to get pushed out into Jordan. And then from Jordan, they'll get pushed out into Israel. And then from Israel, who knows? They'll just continue to get attacked in Israel. Um, so that's where we're at with the situation in Jordan and the Gulf and Iran. Similarly, while that was happening between the US and Iran, we've also seen an outbreak with Ansar Allah in Yemen, aka the Houthis. The Western media refers to them as the Houthis, but the name of the group is actually Ansar Allah. So Ansar Allah and Saudi Arabia started trading shots. As well, I believe Bahrain and started exchanging missiles with uh, the Ansar Allah group as well. So I don't see anything really coming of that other than continued erosion of the forces in Saudi Arabia as well as Bahrain. As I think that the Ansar Allah, they've got a lot more room to maneuver in, and they also have a lot more weaponry, and they're also a lot more experienced in this stuff. So on top of all of that going on, another thing that Ansar Allah announced last week is they were closing the Red Sea. So now you've got effectively blockades and enforcement policing of both the Strait of Hormuz as well as the Strait in the Red Sea. I forget the name of it. If somebody knows it, drop it in the comments. But yeah, it's going to cause big problems for those Gulf nations to either import anything or export anything. Now, we hear a lot about the oil not being able to get out from these Gulf countries, but what we don't really think about and what we don't read about a lot is these countries are also desperately dependent on imports, primarily food. They don't grow any food there, it's desert. So unless they can import in a lot of goods, it's probably not a great place to be at right now in the Gulf region. So stay tuned for that. I think that, yeah, I think that it's a really bad situation that's not going to change anytime soon, unless, of course, the Americans decide to come back to the table and start to honor the terms of the MOU or whatever the new agreement will be whenever they get to an agreement. It doesn't seem to me like the thank Bob El Mandeb Strait. Thank you, Tegra. Bob El Mandeb Strait. So that's effectively the situation that's going on in Iran right now. So it's another week of attacks, counterattacks, tit for tats, and nothing really happening on the diplomatic level. So what does that mean for everyone else? Well, all that means is you're going to have an additional week compounded where the price of oil and gas continue to rise because the supply in the global markets for either just isn't there. And if you don't have the raw, heavy crude, you obviously can't refine it into things like gasoline or diesel or jet fuel. So I don't know if you've looked at flights lately. They've all gone up, and reason that's always being quoted is the price of jet fuel, and that's the rationale for raising prices. So the era of cheap travel, I think, is gone, and this has been something that's building up the last several years. But I think the era of cheap travel that we've been experiencing the last, say 25 years, maybe, that's going by the wayside pretty quickly. It used to be that, I remember as a kid, even in the, growing up in the early 80s, as a kid, flying was something that you didn't often do. If you went on a family trip, a lot of the family trips were road trips. And, if you were well off middle class, maybe you'd, take the family on a vacation somewhere once a year. Um, what's this? Let me share this with the screen here. Chief diplomat. Even calling him that makes me giggle. Chief diplomat, Secretary of State Marco Rubio says that it's not tit for tat in Iran. It's eye or an eye for an eye. It's a head for an eye. Okay, Marco. Marco, I guess, likes wrapping his head around heads. I'll leave that for you guys to think about. But where was I? Yeah, it used to be that getting on a flight was sort of an event in and of itself, because back then things were a lot less globalized than they are now, a lot less connected, as you can imagine. This was pre-internet and all that. So if you wanted to go, for example, if I wanted to fly to Florida for something, for a family of four, just the flight alone would cost thousands upon thousands of dollars. Um, I remember, if you were to even go back before the Great Recession or even after Great Recession of '08, yeah, you could fly to Florida with your family. You could get tickets for on flights. They were so dirt cheap, $300 or whatever per person. Cost you nothing. Return cost you nothing to get down there. Nowadays, if I was to check out those flights, I think they'd be triple that at least per person. So that's sort of where we're at with that. I think that, like I said, just another week of inertia on the diplomatic front and the negotiation front and the settlement front just means that that supply shock is compounded another extra week. Um, so what does that mean for the world? Well, it means everything will continue to get more expensive, and you're starting to see shortages in the world of gas and diesel. Wayne and I were talking about Russia last week. They were experiencing some gasoline shortages. You're starting to see parts of Asia, outside of China, I should say, but other countries in Asia are starting to feel the effects of higher gas, LNG, as well as diesel prices. And for countries like that, and for people like that, if you've got, if the price of gas goes up by, even 10 cents a liter or 20 cents a liter, whatever it may be, for me and you, that might not seem like a lot, but a person in, I don't know, Vietnam, that could be, considerable. based on their income levels and things like that. So what does all this means? Well, is the supply outstrips the demand for petroleum products, you're just going to see people cutting back. And you're seeing that now. For example, one of the big reasons why our oil prices haven't skyrocketed up to $250 yet, or $150, I should say, is China. So one of the things that's happening because of reduced demand, China has also been cutting back on their purchases of oil because they really don't need as much. Because they've got less factory activity. It's all within the same sort of system, right? So, what happens when China starts rebuying oil? Well, you're going to see the price go up, and you're seeing that happen now with both oil and natural gas in particular. One of the big suppliers of LNG is Qatar coming out of the Gulf, and none of that is getting to market, or very little of it, I should say. And I think that what that means is the countries who are now reliant on that LNG coming from Qatar, for example, countries in Europe, they are now competing against other countries, such as countries in Asia, for the same LNG around the world, and they're getting outbid. So, what does that mean? Well, it means a couple things. Number one, it means that you're probably going to be seeing some shortages of natural gas in the EU sooner than later. And it also means it's going to be a lot higher. So, yeah, I was just reading this morning that there was worry in the EU of sourcing LNG for the winter period. This is the time when the EU is typically filling up their tanks. There's reserve tanks. So they've got these big, massive, you know, LNG tanks in Europe as well as other parts of the world that countries will store up LNG for their, future use. And in Europe, their biggest use of LNG, besides industry, is just heating their homes and stuff like that, particularly in the winter. And if they don't start filling up those tanks, they're going to find that they're going to have a shortage come winter. So that's what this article that I was reading, it was just this morning actually, about there was worry that, number one, they wouldn't be able to source enough LNG, and number two, even if they were, it was going to be wildly expensive. So here's another article that I was just reading the other day. This is an example of Germany. So Germany, let me talk about Germany. When I talk about the Europe or EU, what I really mean is Germany. Okay, so there's something about ice that makes a drink better. Um, so yeah, Germany is basically the economic engine of Europe, as we all know, and there's not a whole lot else in Europe. You know, France has got some industries and some big companies like Airbus or Total Energy, things like that. They might have they've also got uh, pharma. I forget the name of it though. It eludes me right now, but big pharma company in France. You've got some other pharma companies in Switzerland. You've got ASML, the chip hardware manufacturer in the Netherlands. And then you've got a bunch of industries in Germany, whether it be the auto industry, petrochemical industries, things like that. And it was really other than that, there's not a whole lot else in Europe that I can think of offhand that is massively large that'll move the needle globally. If we were to lose those companies and their supply, like I said, you got Airbus, which is a big company and needed in the world because there's not that many jet manufacturers. And you got your big pharma and the rest of the big, and then like I said, in Germany, the auto and petrochemicals and machine tools and things like that. The rest of Europe is pretty much being built on financial services in places like London or Frankfurt or Paris, and that's it. What does Italy make? Italy has got a lot of small manufacturers that export things globally, which I think is a good thing. Um, they probably got some fashion designers and stuff like that, but nothing that people really care about. So what's happening in Germany? Well, as we know, because we follow this stuff, if you're watching this, they have been basically deindustrializing since 2022 when the outbreak of conflict happened in Ukraine. And, here's an article that I read just today. German industry is bleeding jobs 100, or should I say 15,000 jobs every month, according to whatever this association is, lobby group. And basically, the article is saying stuff that a lot of us here already know, but Germany has been pretty rapidly deindustrializing the last 4 years. And you ask yourself, why? Is it because the Germans forgot how to manufacture things? No. Is it because they lack the innovation? Partially, yeah, I think so. Particularly in the automotive industry, um, they just haven't figured out EVs for whatever reason. And it's not just the German auto manufacturer; it's all Western manufacturers are getting their lunch eaten by the Chinese EVs because the battery technology in China is just so much better, and their supply lines are just so much more efficient. And basically, China has unlimited cheap energy, so they don't have the cost of production that a place like Germany would. So that's what's happening. And why is that? Well, for whatever reason, well, we know the reason. Basically, the Euro elites in Brussels and the Olaf Scholzes of the world, the Emmanuel Macrons, these globalist leaders back in 2022, the plan was all along to use Ukraine as a proxy. That proxy would defeat Russia. Russia would not need to be necessarily defeated militarily. They just needed to be defeated economically. So some genius came up with the idea, once we remove Russia from SWIFT, the entire Russian economy will collapse. It's just, John McCain famously said it's just a gas station masquerading as a country. And, there's a lot of hubris around how the Russians didn't know how to manage an economy. They didn't know how to manage a country. They were all corrupt, so on and so forth. This was basically the arguments around using Ukraine as a battering ram against Russia. It was, how do we defeat Russia either economically or militarily? Either way, as long as we get the win, and then we can get into Russia, break it up, balkanize it the same way we did places like Yugoslavia, and then exploit the weak leadership that we're going to install in each of these places to give us those resources for cheap to nothing, right? And that's basically been the Western model for the last 500 years. And so it shouldn't really come as a shock to anyone. You know, Spanish, the Portuguese, the Brits, the Americans. I mean, like I said, it's been the playbook for the last 500 years. Is you colonize a place and then you exploit the hell out of it until you've sucked it dry, and then you move on somewhere else. So that was the plan for Russia. So they didn't really think that it would be a problem. However, they didn't have a plan B, it doesn't seem like. And here we are 4 or 5 years later, and this is the result. Let me just show you this. This is something I pulled this morning. So you look here, this is natural gas from Germany. And this just goes back a year. But you look here in December of 2026, which wasn't that long, or 2025, I should say, wasn't that long ago. LNG was under $30. As you can see now, it's now skyrocketed to $70. So that's just since December. We've seen a more than doubling of price. Now, the funny thing is, and I couldn't figure out how to get this all the way back, if you take this back to, say, 2021, pre-Ukraine conflict, they were paying Russia under 10 euros for the natural gas. So effectively, we've now seen in Germany, it was under, because it was all contract price. They had a contract with the Russians, and that was the agreed upon price for however long. Now that they cut Russia off and that contract was effectively null and void, then they moved to more expensive suppliers, primarily Norway, Netherlands, and the US. And the cost of that LNG, as you can see, is very, very high compared to Russia, or even compared to its own price a year ago, as you can see right here. Why is that? Well, because these are open market prices that they have to buy it at not contracted prices. So basically, if you're an industrialist in Germany making petrochemicals, which is highly dependent on natural gas as an input, you've seen your input cost of energy go from under 10 euros to 70 in 5 years' time. So if you're running a petrochemicals company in Germany, you're running an auto company in Germany, you're not thinking of building anything in Germany. You can't afford it. It's not cost beneficial to do so. So what these companies are doing now is, well, a lot of them have already begun to move outside of Germany to lower cost places. Ironically, China. So you have companies like BASF, big petrochemical group. They've been investing in China, building out their capacity in China, where energy, well, number one, where things are a lot more predictable, and number two, a lot cheaper. Same thing with the cars. Volkswagen announced a couple weeks ago that they're laying off 100,000 people. And it's just going to get to the point where cars are no longer produced in Germany. And when that goes, when you get those big heavy industries like auto and petrochemicals and things like that, if they're not going to be produced in Germany, then what do you have left, really? What do you have left to survive or to make the EU a viable financial bloc? Not a whole lot. And I've said this before, but eventually it'll be to the point where Europe is just uh, nice place to visit, nice place to look at the old ruins. But beyond that, you'd never want to do business there. You certainly wouldn't want to live there because the people there are all going to get absolutely gouged because eventually you have to find someone who's going to pay the bill. So Germany, not a good place to be in Germany. I think you've got, they realize what their mistakes were. The new Chancellor Merz did an interview with one of the German publications maybe it was Der Spiegel or one of them a couple weeks ago, and he kind of admitted that the reason Germany is in such dire economic straits in terms of industry and industry losses, he came out and straight up said, yeah, a big factor of this is we're not getting cheap Russian gas anymore. And, so he says this in the interview. And to me, if I'm the interviewer and a journalist, my next logical question would be, so what are you doing about it? Are you going to call Russia? Are you going to, get Nord Stream cranking up again? What's the plan here, man? Nah, they didn't bother asking him any of that. But it didn't mean that what he'd said wasn't true, it's very true. So now you've got the Germans who are running low on LNG, and the LNG that they're buying is, cost prohibitive. The next thing you have is they're going around the world trying to find LNG from wherever they can find it. They've got trade missions going to Africa. There's another one that I was just reading here. They signed an agreement with Canada back in May for, I think it was 1 million cubic tons or something of LNG. And they're looking to source more LNG from Canada because Canadian LNG is produced at a lot cheaper price than the LNG down in the US, for example. So they want to look for a cheaper alternative to the US. I got news for them though. The price is not going to be that much cheaper. It's not, you're never going to see €10 natural gas again, Germany. I'm sorry. And furthermore, we've got all sorts of logistical issues here in Canada that would need to be addressed before anything is exported to Germany or anywhere else. You see, under Justin Twinkle Toes Trudeau, they basically outlawed anything that was related to the oil and gas industry. You know, carbon bad was always the motto. So Canadian investment, which is ironic too, because oil and gas is by far Canada's number one export to the world. Yet we had a government and still have a government that has been in power now for 15 years, whatever it's been, or maybe I don't know how long it's been. It's been too fucking long. Let's just put it that way. Uh, so we've got this government in power, whether it be the Trudeau clan or the Mark Carney clan. They're all globalist clan. They're all WAF clan. They're all the same, and they believe that carbon's bad. World needs to decarbonize. The country needs to decarbonize. So what does that mean? It means no investment. We haven't had any investment in our infrastructure, our oil and gas infrastructure, in years. Unless it was infrastructure that was built by a private company or something. But the big, massive pipelines and things like that, we haven't put any money into it at all that I can recall. So how do you get LNG from Western Canada over to a place like Germany? Right? That's a lot of country that you need to cross. And then you got to cross an ocean. Then you got to cross more countries. And we don't have an east west pipeline that goes to Eastern Canada, for example. You would think we would have one, being, that oil and gas is our major export, and it has been for decades. But for some strange reason, the various governments of the day have never seen it fit to build a pipeline to export our oil and gas to anybody but the US. So if you want to, there's north-south pipelines down into the US. We don't have anything that goes east-west. And we're starting to build one that is going west from Alberta to BC, but there's nothing cross-country. So I guess what I'm saying to Germany is, yeah, signing a deal with Canada on exporting LNG. Uh, yeah, we'll get back to you in 5 years, maybe, or something like that. I just don't know how logistically it would get exported from Western Canada to Germany. I don't know how that would look. It would be very costly in any event, because at the very least, you could probably route it up to Churchill in Manitoba, up in Hudson Bay. You're almost up in the Arctic. And then you would have to figure out a path to get through uh, pretty rough, cold, icy waters through the Northwest Territories and Hudson Bay before you could get out onto the Atlantic. So I guess what I'm saying is it would be very costly. Like I don't think they'd be saving any money because we just don't have the infrastructure here. Um, you read other articles, like I said, they're going around with the Beggar's Bowl to places in Africa, uh, Azerbaijan, places like that. But you know, the thing about it is they're competing with everybody else for the same product, and they're getting outbid, and logistically, it's just easier to get to other places. So that's kind of the deal with, and as Germany goes, so too does the rest of the world. Um, so with that said, what does that mean for the EU? Um, I don't know. It seems like they don't have a plan other than continuing on the same trajectory that they're on, which is how do we sanction Russia into oblivion after 20 plus sanctions packages haven't worked? We're just going to keep sanctioning. Um, how do we diversify? Well, like I said, they're going around places looking for LNG. Uh, but if those places had LNG to sell that was readily available, it would already be sold. Uh, the only nation that it seems like that might have capacity for the EU nations is a place like Russia, because Russia already has the infrastructure connected to the EU through various pipelines, whether they be on ground through Hungary and places like that, or whether it be Nord Stream, and Nord Stream 2. When we know how that went. So until the Europeans, I guess they haven't suffered enough yet. Until they suffer more and people are out on the streets starving, and people like Ursula von der Leyen are being chased down the street, things are not going to change in Europe. I'm actually surprised that it hasn't gotten that bad yet, where people aren't protesting. But yeah, what can I say? Europe is a special, special place that way. They seem to be suckers for their own punishment. And you ask yourself why. I don't know, is it hubris that they think they're right? No, maybe, but it's probably also has to do with the fact that they've sunk so much into Project Ukraine already, and that they don't have an off ramp for it, because they've been spending the last 5 years telling everybody that Putin is Hitler, and how do you make a deal with Hitler, and how do you kind of undo everything that you've done to put your tail between your legs then and say, okay, well, Project Ukraine didn't work out. Sorry, Ukraine. Everybody, please go back to Ukraine and you guys figure it out on your own. We're out. And now we're going to give Russia a call. That would be the most pragmatic solution. But I think that the political people within the EU, um, I don't know, they're just not that bright, or they are just so politically captured that they can't get off their train wreck of a course that they're on. So yeah, not a good place to live. I wouldn't want to be in. I don't even want to be in the country I'm in. Okay, I can't imagine what the Europeans are going to go through in the next, say, 20 years, because you're going to see. Well, all of our standards of living have decreased, and wherever you are in the West, whether it be U.S., Canada, Europe, Australia, Japan, South Korea, our standards of living have all um, decreased in the last couple decades, and it started slowly and barely noticeable, because largely because as I was saying before, we were offsetting our inflation with a lot of cheap Chinese goods. So although things were getting more expensive, we could still offset that with cheap Chinese goods and things like that. So you could keep your disposable income at a certain level. But that's all becoming more expensive now too, as we either cut off our noses to spite our face, or legit inflation coming in and just corroding the value of our currencies. Um, but in any event, that's what's happening in the West. And I think, nations like that are in Europe, I'm not really sure where they're going to be able to go in 10 to 15, 20 years, because they don't have resource bases that people are going to want. Um, 21st century, I've said this before, it's a battle of capital versus commodities, and commodities will always win that battle, because you can't eat T-bills. You can't plant them, you can't take them out of the ground and do whatever with them, mine them. You can't do any of that stuff. So nations with a lot of natural resources will typically do better over time, and certainly better in an economic shock than those without. So am I seeing a decline in living standards in Canada? Hell yes. Are you seeing in the US? Of course, because we're also deindustrializing. As we all got on the same playbook 30 years ago, which was, we're going to outsource all this work, and effectively we're going to outsource our middle class to places like China to get those cheap goods that I talked about. So on the one hand, we outsourced all of our work, on the other, to the benefit of getting cheaper stuff, but that's now coming back home to roost on us, because all the people here are broke and unemployed, because all the knowledge work that they said we'd be doing for the future, that's all been outsourced now too. It's either been outsourced or made irrelevant. So through technology, automation, AI, you name it, knowledge work is easy to replace, really easy to replace. So we all became knowledge workers. That seemed to work out for about 25 years or so. And now we're back to really the economies that I was used to growing up, which is more commodity-based economies. Um, so a country like Canada, a country like the US, where we have a lot of natural resources within our borders, or a country like Brazil, Australia, like these are countries that have a lot of resources within their borders that they can still, um, capitalize on and benefit from. But, when you got a country like, Germany or Japan or the UK that really produce nothing, when you think about it, certainly nothing in any quantities that matter, uh, you know, what's their future look like? It doesn't look very bright to me. A country like Japan, which imports all of their food. They import all of their oil and gas. They don't really, they don't mine anything. They barely grow anything. Uh, what's a country like that to do in the 21st century world when you're a manufacturing powerhouse that is reliant on other nations for its inputs? So that's the situation Japan's in. That's the situation Germany's in. And then a country like the UK, for example, they're in a completely different situation because they don't manufacture anything per se. They financialize their entire economy. So that'll be the next thing that gets automated away and moved out of places like the UK in favor of other major financial centers, whether it be New York or Shanghai or Hong Kong, places like that. That's where all the financial industry will move in the future. These satellite places, whether they be in in a place like London, why does your financial market need to be? Why do you need a financial market in London? Right? You don't. It was just historically that's where a stock exchange was, and it continued on well past its sell by date. Same thing with commodities exchange. They had a commodities exchange there for hundreds of years, and what's the point now? Right. So, a place like the UK has quickly become irrelevant for a lot of different reasons. Um, and I think that you're just going to see continued erosion of living standards in those countries and a lot of chaos because with erosion comes chaos. So you're going to see a lot more protesting, a lot more misplaced rage against immigrants or against whatever because they don't want to look at the root causes of why their economies are the way they are. They know it. Like these are not stupid people. I don't think the Bank of England employs dummies. I don't think the German politicians are a bunch of idiots. But like I said, they can't get out of the current location that they've programmed into their GPS, and they don't want to change course. So that's where they're going to go. So, what does this mean for a nation like the US? Well, I think it means that you're seeing, you're seeing a lot less demand for treasury. Let me just dig this up. I was looking at this earlier. This is the latest month available is May, but this would be the major holders of treasuries. So you look at Japan, they're basically flat year over year. And you say to yourself, well, is that bad if they're flat year over year? No, but yes. Because think of the US Treasury as this hungry, hungry hippo. Yeah, remember that game where you're banging on the hippos for eating the marbles and whoever got them all? That's the US Treasury. And the US Treasury keeps growing and growing and growing. And the debt keeps growing and growing and growing. The US annual deficit keeps growing and growing and growing. So, what that means is there's a growing and growing demand for US treasuries. So, what does that mean? Well, they got to sell those treasuries to whatever suckers they can find to take their worthless paper in exchange for a promissory note that they're going to pay back a certain percentage for 5 years, 10 years, whatever. So the fact that Japan is flat year over year, you look at China, they've gone from 732 down to 659. Now, if you were to look at this going back to say 2022, China held close to 1.5 trillion in securities, and now they're down to 659. That's an incredible drop in just a handful of years. So all of these nations, except for the vassal states, are basically de-dollarizing in record time. So that means that demand for treasuries is not as great. And what that also means is those who are buying treasuries are demanding higher yields for the same treasuries. And what that means is they want a higher return. So if you were to look at for example, the 10-year US Treasury bond rate, the last I checked, I think it was around 4.6. And the 30 year is over 5 right now. So what does that mean? It it means that effectively the yield for the 10-year has doubled in the last several years, because it used to be down, 2% or whatever it was. Now investors are looking for 4.5. Uh, and a lot of people are saying that that will hit 5%, could be by the end of the year. So what does that mean? That means that the interest payments that the U.S. has to make will continue to grow, which will only add to the debt, which will then in turn require even higher yields to offset that debt risk, if that makes sense. So the U.S. is in a debt spiral now, and there's not a whole lot of way out of it. You're never going to pay off $39 trillion. Never. Just never. Uh, so what does that mean then? It means that you're damned if you do, or you're damned if you don't, as they say. Inflation is hitting everything and everyone. The cost of everything is going up because of those input costs that I talked about. If the price of oil goes up, the price of basically everything goes up, because oil is so key to so many things within all of our industries, whether it be direct inputs to a product, whether it be transportation of that product, and so on and so forth. So inflation will continue to go up, but then the only way that the Fed has to, control or somewhat control inflation, the only lever that they really have to manage inflation is either increasing or decreasing the Fed rate. So we've got this huge inflation bubble. The logic thing to do would be to increase interest rates, which would lower the demand for debt. It would reduce the prices of those bonds. But it would also, if you increase the interest rate, it would reduce demand for sure, but it would also make paying the interest on that debt even higher. So that when you hear somebody like Donald Trump talk about we need low interest rates, it's because the cost structures of the Fed or a lot of these big banks, which have high exposure to T-bills, it basically means that it will be much harder for them to, for example, to the U.S. Treasury to pay all that back, because you increase the inflation, you increase the interest rate to reduce inflation, but your interest payments are now higher than they were. So you're, like I said, you're damned if you do, you're damned if you don't. If you raise rates to battle inflation, you might get lower inflation, but you'll get higher interest. But if you keep interest rates artificially low in order to manage your debt, that just means that regular people are going to get slapped to death with inflation. And the reason why you see, a loaf of bread costing $5. And I saw something in the news the other day, a thing of ice cream in one of the stores was $15. $15 for a quart of ice cream is insane. But these are the types of things that you're going to start seeing for all these products, because, like I said, everything is connected to oil. And furthermore, if interest rates do go up, the yield, I mean, on the T-bills, well, that yield is used to set rates for everything else. So the 10-year yield is probably the most important rate in the world because it is used to set rates on other things, whether it be, car loans or mortgage payments or whatever, personal loans, things like that. So I guess what I'm saying is there's no easy way out of this, particularly when the US deficit continues to grow and grow and grow every year. Um, it grows for lots of reasons. Like I said, higher interest payments, as I had mentioned. But you also have things like Donald Trump asking for $1.5 trillion to restock the military because they're out of missiles. So there's things like that too that are just going to continue to increase the deficit and hence the debt. So yeah, it's a no-win spiral in a lot of ways for the United States, and I don't know how they're going to get out of this. But like I said, you see the numbers there, and you ask yourself, what's next? Well, I think a depression is pretty much guaranteed at this point. Will it be a global depression? Probably. Will some countries fare better than others? Yes. I don't think Russia, I don't think China will be as hurt as bad as, the Western nations that I talked about. And then, like I said, within the Western nations, I think some countries, the ones with resources, US, Canada, Australia in particular, they'll all be better off than some of their counterparts, but still, it's going to hit us really badly. Um, yeah, I don't know what else to say about that. It's all pretty depressing, to be honest with you. But it's where we're at. I mean, the other thing I wanted to talk to today, particularly with the US, is not only do you have this real treasury problem where the demand for treasuries has dropped to, you know, shit levels, and the demand or the supply of said treasuries far exceeds demand at this point. So what Scott Bessen's been doing, he's been going around, begging everybody and anybody to buy a T-bill. He's also been going around and pressuring the big banks, the JP Morgans of the world and the Bank of Americas, to buy those T-bills as well, because they're not getting foreign buyers like they normally would. So where do they go now? They go to the banks. And what's that mean? Well, eventually, when that market goes tits up, it just means that those banks are going to have huge losses that will either need to be realized or they're going to require some sort of bailout, too big to fail, all that stuff, which will probably result in more money printing by the Fed, which will only exacerbate the problem because that will just lead to higher money supply and hence more inflation. You see what I'm saying now? That it's a no-win situation. It's like there's no good moves to make anymore, and it doesn't seem like the Fed has much leverage in doing anything. So what does that then mean? It means that a lot of these companies are going to take major hits. It also means that this stock market that President Pigshit keeps talking about, oh, it's the greatest stock market. How's your 401k? It's going to go bust. And that's why I put Trump flying in a little balloon, because here's a scary stat for you. And I was reading this the other day. Something like 40 to 45% of the value of the US stock market is in the Magnificent Seven, the big companies, the Google, I don't even know who's in the Mag Seven these days, but it's your Google, it's your Tesla, it's your Anthropics, it's whoever companies like that who uh, we've seen the US has seemed to put all their eggs in the AI basket. And what that's going to mean is if it succeeds, then great. But there's no indication that it's going to succeed. We basically have, if you've got 40 to 45% of the value of your stock market in 7 companies, and those 7 companies are all reliant on the AI boom and the AI build out, I think the US is in a lot of trouble there too, because the reality is they're spending all sorts of money, adding all sorts of liabilities to their balance sheets, and they're not getting the benefit of it. Why? Well, lots of reasons why. Number one, competition. You've got China, who's coming out with better technology, and it's all open source. The plan was we are, the US Mag 7, these companies, the Chat GPT folks, and all these guys, the plan ultimately or originally was we are going to ring fence this technology. It's going to be so wild and great that everybody's going to need it and want to buy it. And they're only going to be able to buy it from us, right? Well, what then happened was they cut off China of a lot of access to chips or technology that would assist China in building out their own AI models. Effectively, what China did was they worked around it and they ended up building better models, not so much over the hardware side of things, but on software development. So uh, you have companies like DeepSeek or Manus, or the latest one is Kimi K3, which was released a couple of weeks ago, and it just blew the performance metrics out of the water compared to all of these American models, whether it be ChatGPT or Claude or Grok or any of these models. Kimi K3 blew them all out of the water. And the best thing about the Chinese models, they're all open source. So China defeated the US at their own game, in the sense where, the US and the American companies plan to ring fence the technology and then monetize it. China came out and said, "Yeah, we are going to build these models, and we're going to make them open source to everybody." And I don't think the Mag 7 crowd really thought that that was going to happen. So if you recall, when the DeepSeek model came out, I think it was around December of last year, uh, that woke up everybody. And since then, there are other companies that are coming out. Well, DeepSeek has now come out with even better models, and they're doing their own IPO. Like I said, you've got Kimi K3, which blew the doors off of all the performance metrics there a couple weeks ago. That's been released. That's open source. What that then means is if you're a company and you're looking to, invest in AI, an AI platform and a stack, are you going to choose the wildly expensive US model, which is heavily controlled and regulated, and there's a lot of business rules around it, and so on and so forth? Or are you going to take the model that's free and allows you to code it any way you want to suit your business? Well, obviously, you're going to choose number three, or the second option, and that's what we're seeing now. Uh, I don't know anybody in 2026 who's still using an American model. Like, just think about it in your own day-to-day life. what models do you use, if any? I don't use it. Last time I used Chat GPT was maybe 3 years ago. When it first came out. Um, the Claude model is fucking garbage compared to models that I've used. Whether it be I've been playing around ever since I retired, and I've had more time on my hands. I've been playing around with some of these models, and for my own either personal interest or tried to set up my online trading card business. That's what I'm doing now. It's a lot of fun. Uh, Having lots of fun, actually. But anyway, sorry. Off topic. Yeah, I think what I've noticed is in using the Chinese models, whether it be DeepSeek or Manus or Kimi K3 models like that, a lot easier to use. You get better results. There's no hassle. Like I don't find myself arguing with with the model like I would with a Claude or a GPT. So, just as a layman, I'm by no means am I a programmer or anything. Ease of use on these open source models, way better. So you're just going to see companies, you're already seeing companies actually using these models. Microsoft, as an example, they're looking at replacing their internal models with DeepSeek. Now, what does that mean? Well, it means that the US regulators and US politicians are looking to potentially ban the use of Chinese models in the US. Uh, you know, anytime the US can't defeat something, they look to ban it. And all that will mean is if they do ban that stuff, all it's going to mean is that all these US companies are going to be at a disadvantage versus the rest of the world who are using the cheaper, more flexible Chinese models. So over time, you're just going to see improved efficiency elsewhere in the world versus the US. So I think that that's also going to be a big problem for the US that nobody seems to be talking about. What does all this mean? Well, if you've got 45% of your stock market is made up of a handful of companies, that's wildly risky. And particularly companies that aren't necessarily profitable. Yeah, sure, Google is profitable, Microsoft is profitable, but Anthropic and these other newer companies, they're not profitable at all. They don't make a dime. Not yet anyway. And it doesn't look like based on their business model that they ever will, because why would they? Like who would be using that as their platform in the years going forward? I don't know. So you have 45% tied up in all these companies that it just seems to me are not competitive. It means that they're all going to crash. And that's also already starting to happen. Two companies within the Mag 7 reported last week on their quarterly results, Google and Tesla. They both missed, and the market reacted violently against it, and they lost over $500 billion. T with a T, $500 billion in market capitalization was lost on Google and Tesla in the span of about 3 days last week. That's just a ridiculous amount of money to lose on your market cap after an earnings release. So what that tells me is that a lot of investors, particularly these are institutional investors, I think they're seeing the writing on the wall with respect to the AI bubble. And I think that they realize that, the business model, the quote plan to ring fence this technology uh, is no longer valid. And what that means is they're getting out of those companies. So, do the math. when you've got that much of the stock market tied up in these companies and they're all taking a shit uh, at the same time, you're just going to see the stock market implode and it's going to tank and tank quickly. And you're starting to see that now. You started to see that last week, and doesn't look good. And that, of course, is going to have ripple effects throughout the economy as well, because, if you're in the US or wherever in the US, because Trump was talking about 401ks, right? And how's your 401k doing? Blah, 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 blah. If they get decimated, well, all of a sudden, that person who is in retirement and all their money is tied up in their 401k, they're going to be broke. And they're going to be reliant on their whatever it's called, the old age security, whatever it's called, Social Security. They're all going to be, relying on their Social Security checks in whatever little they have left in their 401ks, which is sad. You take your money, you put it into your 401k, you get your employer to match it, you do everything right. And then once you're done, you expect to have some sort of, decent retirement in it. But, if you're not on top of it and you're investing in some of these companies thinking that you're doing well, because all you hear is about how great these companies are and how innovative they are and how they're the future. And you listen to Donald Trump tell you go out and buy these companies because, the stock market's on a roll and so on and so forth. Okay, well, what happens when it all crashes? It just means that those people are broke now. And I saw this. I remember back during the 2008 recession. I was working at the time I was working at a publisher, actually, and doing all their inventory management stuff and logistics. It was a fun job, actually. But anyway, we didn't have like a traditional defined benefit pension plan. We had a defined contribution plan, which is similar to a 401k, employer matches and stuff like that. And I remember one woman in particular, she had been working there since she was 18 years old and she was up in her 60s. She'd been there for 40 odd years. And she had all of her money in her 401k. And then when the '08 recession hit, she got walloped and her RRSP was cut in half in the span of like a year, and she actually had to keep working longer than she thought she was going to need to because she couldn't afford to retire because her defined contribution plan had taken such a hit. So yeah, you'll start to see that down in the States with people with their 401ks for sure, because once it's gone, it takes very long to make back up. Take this as somebody who's made a lot of bad investment choices. So I know how bad it is. Once you lose your money to an industry that goes tits up, you never get it back. I once invested at 800 grand in cannabis, and I lost my shirt every friggin' dime in it because the company went tits up. So yeah, been there, seen it myself. Um, but yeah, you just keep going, right? But yeah, this poor woman who had spent 40 plus years of her life, almost 50 years really, um, and I think she had to keep working another 5 years longer than she thought she'd have to until she was 70. So yeah, you'll hear a lot about that in the US in the coming decade. You're gonna hear lots, I think, about how the boomer generation doesn't have any money and they're all broke and they're all destitute. I think that's coming soon, sometime in the next 10 years for sure. Because the age of defined benefit contribution plans is like the old company pension. That's all thrown out the window and they're all on these defined contribution plans, which is what the 401k plan is. It's a defined contribution plan. And when the market's good and the market keeps going up, yeah, you could make the argument that a plan like that would work. But when the market takes it in the ass, you never hear about that though. You never hear about how broke people are, but when that happens, but sure enough, you will. Give it time, and people are going to start. You're going to hear a lot about how everybody's broke, not just young people. You're hearing about young people being broke now, but the boomers are still living high on the hog. Give it a few years. Give it more time. Once the ass goes out of the stock market, they're all going to lose the ass out of their pants. They're not going to have any money. The only asset they're going to have is their house, which they'll inevitably have to end up selling because their 401ks won't be able to pay for their lifestyles, and whatever they get in Social Security won't be enough either. Particularly if they do away with Social Security. And don't you worry, that's coming. That's coming. It's just a matter of time. It's like what George Carlin said. You know, they want it all back, and they're coming for your Social Security money. They're going to get it. They're going to get it. Trump is already talking about it. They're already talking about the Australian model and how they want to implement the Australian model into the US. That'll be a nightmare because the Australian model is a nightmare. Half the seniors down in Australia are living below the poverty line. They don't want to tell you that either, but it's true. Yeah, I guess I'll leave it at that. If nobody's going to join, I guess if there's no other questions or if anybody has anything else that they'd like to talk about, let me know in the comments. And other than that, I guess I'll call it a day. So I'll give you guys a minute or so to type something in the chat. Otherwise, I guess everybody's out doing something else or they're on the other open mic. Um, yeah, that's about it for me. That was my recap of the week. Um, what else happened last week? Well, the World Cup ended, but I wasn't watching that anyway, so I couldn't tell you anything about it other than it, it just seemed like Trump got up and looked like a fool in front of the team Spain. But you don't hear anything about the World Cup anymore. It's done, dusted, over with. And there's nothing else really in the world of geopolitics that comes to mind. I think next week what I might do is do an episode talking about a particular place, and maybe I'll get back to talking about Africa because I like talking about Africa and all the stuff going on there because not that I'm an expert on it or anything, but I do try to keep up on the goings on in Africa because it's a place that we don't hear a lot about, and what we do hear about is all negative. But there's a lot of good stuff going on in Africa right now too, so maybe I'll look in that more. And that is about it for me. Other than that, I hope you guys all have a wonderful week ahead. Um, I've got nothing planned. The thing about I gotta find I gotta ramp up my sports card business a bit more. I'm gonna start doing some uh, live auctions and things like that. It's just really I'm just kind of dragging my feet. It's summer. I got a hammock. I've got weed. I've got music. So I like just chilling out and taking it easy. Um, but yeah, at some point I should really get on, building up my business a little bit more. I'm lazy and I don't have to. So it's nice just taking a break and doing things that I like to do as opposed to having to do. It's nice to be able to, for example, go fishing and not have to worry about work or anything else. And you just got your fishing rod and you got your music, headphones, beautiful day. Uh, that's kind of nice. Um, Got to move out of here though. I got to get back to the coast. The coast is where it's at. I was born on the coast, literally, maybe 100 yards from the Atlantic Ocean, and I miss it a lot. So got to convince the wife to get the hell out of here. But she loves her job. She loves the whole thing. So I think I'm stuck here at least until another 10 years or so, whenever she decides to retire. But um, yeah, I think I need more hobbies, I guess is what I'm saying. Anyway, you guys have a great and wonderful day. I'll check you on the next one. And like I said, if you haven't seen the Odyssey yet, check out my review. No, I don't want to ruin the review, but it was a good movie, not great. I think it didn't live up to the hype. Had I not watched all of the had I not read the reviews and how everybody's saying what a wonderful movie it was and how, oh, it's the best movie ever and it's one of the greatest movies of all time, blah blah blah. Like they laid it on pretty thick. So I went in there with the expectation that it was going to blow my mind, and it didn't blow my mind. Was it very good? Yes, absolutely. If you're going to see it, big screen is the way to go. But if you don't see it, that's fine too. That was basically my thought of it. It was, I'm glad I saw it, I guess, but had I not seen it, it would have been just the same. Um, Maybe you have a different opinion of it. If you do, let me know in the comments. And like, share, and subscribe to this channel. And I'll catch you guys next time. Cheers and peace out.